started recording, then you... Yeah. Did you click? Yeah.
Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahana Punatu Saha Viryam Karavahe Tejasvina Vadhitamastu Ma Vidvisavaye Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May He protect us. May He sustain us. May we grow in strength together. May our study together be fruitful. And may we not hate one another. Oh, peace, peace, peace. So, good evening. We've only got about 3 verses to go, so we'll probably finish the book tonight. And we're in part 2, chapter 3. And so I'll read what we covered before and then we'll continue. So this world is like a big banyan tree that is rooted high above in Brahma. It has its branches such as men and women, animals, insects, and plants spread out below. The phenomenal world is timeless in the sense that it comes and goes again and again like waves, in other words, in cycles. And the root of this tree is Brahma. It is pure and, they say, immortal. All the worlds, including this planet, rest on it. Nothing can surpass it. This truly is that self that Nachiketa was talking about. Whatever is in this world has come from Prana. In other words, Brahma associated with Maya, its own power. Again, in Prana, all this rest and functions. This Brahman is like a thunderbolt about to strike. It is a great terror. Those who know this Brahman become immortal. From fear of it, the fire gives heat. Out of terror, the sun shines. Afraid of it, Indra, Vayu, and the 5th death rush to perform their respective duties. If anyone is able to attain the knowledge of Brahman before death, he gets liberation in this very life. Otherwise, he is born again and again in this world and other worlds. Just as a clear reflection is seen in a clear mirror, so also the self is seen in a pure mind. In the world of the ancestors, you see yourself hazily as you see things in a dream. In the world of the Gandharvas, you see the self as you see a reflection in water. In other words, again, hazily. But when you see yourself in the world of Brahma, you see it as clearly as you see light and shade. The sense organs have a separate origin in that they are products of the elements. They are active when an individual is awake. They are idle when he is asleep. A truly wise person knows that the self is independent of the sense organs, and he is therefore no longer susceptible to sorrow. The mind is superior to the sense organs. The intellect is superior to the mind. Superior to the intellect is the great self, Hiranyagarbha. Superior to the great self is the unmanifest, Avyakta. The Purusha, the cosmic self, or Brahman, is all-pervasive and formless. So there is no way of knowing it. If anyone knows it, he is liberated from the cycle of birth and death and attains immortality, even when he is alive. The cosmic self, Purusha, is not an object of our vision. No one can see it by his eyes or perceive it by any other sense organ. It reveals itself in the heart only when the mind is pure and constantly thinks of it. Having realized it properly, one becomes immortal. When the 5 organs of perception stop working, having merged with the mind, and the intellect too has retired from its work, that is the state scholars describe as being the highest spiritual state. According to the yogins, the state in which all the organs are at complete rest is yoga. In that state, a yogin never makes a mistake. For instance, he is not attracted by sense pleasures because he is one with the self. But this yogic state may have its fall, just as it has its rise. The self of Brahman is beyond speech and thought. The eyes and other organs cannot perceive it. Yet some people, having been inspired by the scriptures and their teachers, believe that it exists. But how can it be demonstrated to those who do not believe? First and foremost, one has to have the realization that the cosmic self, in other words, the Paramatma, exists. Next, one must try to realize the true nature of that self. Between the 2 categories of people, those who have the conviction that the cosmic self exists, and those who lack the conviction, the chances are that the self will reveal itself to the former. When a person has all his heart's desires destroyed, he attains immortality and becomes one with Brahman in this very life. When, in this very world, the mind gets rid of all its vagaries, which are the products of ignorance, the mortal man begins to feel he is immortal. This is the message of the Vedanta scriptures. There can be nothing higher than this. So that is, last week we talked on this verse, verse 15. In the commentary that said that man struggles with his desires. They never let him be in peace. If one desire is fulfilled, another soon takes his place, and they keep multiplying. These desires together constitute our bondage. We are like a larva, caught within a cocoon of its own making. These desires arise from our ignorance of our real identity. We think we are the body, and all our activities center around it. The body is, however, a superimposition. Somehow or other, we have to detach ourselves from it. We have to remind ourselves all the time that our real self is ever free without any entanglements. It is supreme and not subservient to anything. It is the self of all. It is in everything, in everybody. It is all. There can be no sense of want in it. Our desires are all due to ignorance, and the best way to tackle them is to uproot them totally. If we can get rid of our desires, we will be free in this very life. Because of our desires, we are born again and again. So if there are no desires, there will be no more birth and death. This is what is called immortality. So this is the verse we talked about some last week. And the basic idea is that this supreme reality, Brahman, is within each and every person. And it's the reality of our being. We mentioned before talking about Brahman how it's described as Satchitananda, existence, consciousness, and bliss. Absolute existence, consciousness, and bliss. Now, our experience of consciousness is primarily the experience of being a body. Right now we're awake, the body's alert, the body's aware of what's going on, and so we say, I'm conscious. When we're asleep and we're not, the body's not functioning, then we say, we're unconscious. But actually, consciousness is something that exists of itself, in its own nature. Just spirit exists by itself. It is not the body, it's not the mind. These are instruments that the spirit, the soul, uses in order to experience this world, to be in the world, to do things, to have this experience. And the subject, that's fine. But the problem is that as we get involved in the world, we tend to forget that we're actually spirit. And then everything becomes difficult. Then we experience the human condition of going through good and bad, of pleasure and pain, the pairs of opposites, a little joy, a little success, and then a little failure, a little misery. And like that, we're fluctuating in a very small kind of life, a very small existence. But yet, all the time, the infinite Brahman, the infinite presence of God is there within us. Now, what keeps us from being aware of it is, as I said, largely due to desires. We look outside ourselves, and we see a person, or we see a thing, or we see a car, or we see something else, and we say, oh, I want that. And then all of our attention gets focused on what we desire, what we want, and then we go after it, and spend often very hard work and sacrifice and everything in order to fulfill that desire, thinking, yes, I need that desire. If I can get this thing, if I can get this object, then I'm going to be happy. Then I'm going to be satisfied. And like that, people all over the world, they're chasing one thing after another, hoping, maybe, well, today was bad, but maybe tomorrow will be better. And like that, going through life and never realizing that everything they could possibly want, beyond any thing they could even conceive of, is there within them. And we've mentioned this before, that most people tend to think, if I get a certain thing, then I'll be happy. But the spiritual teaching is that first you have to be happy. And that happiness it's your own nature, it's your own natural state. When you get identified with the body, and particularly when you get identified with the mind, then the state of your experience goes according to the mood of the mind. If the mind is in a good state, in a kind of a happy state, then you feel, oh yeah, I'm happy, the world's good. If the mind is in a bad state, then you say, oh, well, now I'm miserable, I'm unhappy. And like that, you're going through all these changes, when all the time, the actual happiness is something that's your very nature. And so we tend to think in terms of what's happening to our body and what's happening to our mind and our emotions and so forth. We tend to think in terms of how well am I succeeding in getting the things I want. As long as and see, the problem of desire is as long as you're looking outside yourself and saying, I need this thing here for fulfillment. It may be something kind of very low or something very, very good or high. As long as you're saying, I need something outside to find satisfaction, to find peace of mind, to find some happiness, then you're on the wrong track, and then you're at the mercy of what the world does. And what the world does is that it doesn't always behave the way we want it to. Life doesn't always do what we want it to do. And every time it doesn't do it, then we get frustrated, and we get angry, or we get upset and disturbed. The idea of spiritual life is that you find this presence of God, this divine presence, the spiritual presence, you find it within your own consciousness. And then you realize, oh, I have everything. I'm perfectly satisfied, and then you live out from that state of consciousness, rather than from the state of consciousness which says, I don't have anything and I need to get things. You're now living with the presence of the divine within. Now, and most people, they're not ready to just jump into Brahman, so it starts gradually with a sense of connection. As you begin to meditate, as you begin to kind of withdraw, and this is the central element in meditation, is to be, for the time being, you withdraw your attention from the external world, you start to bring it back in within. Gradually you begin to become aware that there's something there. That when I go within, there's some presence there. The presence of God is there. Gradually it begins to be felt. Usually, first of all, it's just calmness. This is kind of usually the very first thing that comes with meditation, is that a person starts to feel kind of calmed down, kind of centered, kind of okay. I'm okay. I'm not full of this. I'm not ecstatically happy or anything, but I'm kind of calm and peaceful. I'm at peace with myself. Gradually, then, that sense of peace grows into a sense of a living presence, a living something there. And you begin to realize that this is, that God is not just a vague idea, that it's something real and living. And so, as you begin to move more into that consciousness, you begin to realize that I don't need anything at all. Matter of fact, I don't have any interest. When you have a lot of desires, all your attention is going outside, trying to acquire one thing or another. But when you begin to make that inner experience, that inner presence, then gradually you start to go, oh, this is fine. What I'm getting meditation, this gives me peace and joy and happiness, and everything is fine. And so slowly that grows and develops until eventually the whole reality of God, you become conscious. It becomes an actual experience. And this is kind of the ultimate goal, is to realize that you're actually one with God. You're the children of immortal bliss. You know, there's one of the Upanishads says. And this is your true nature. When you, through desire, when you grab hold of the world, you become a human being. And you forget that you're God. You forget that you're a divine, wonderful spiritual being. And like that, you get all tangled up in all kinds of different states of mind and different experiences and so forth. Never realize that all the time you're this wonderful, immortal, eternal being. So the ultimate kind of conquest of desires, you could say, comes when the person really finds, oh, I've got everything I need. Well, I don't need a BMW. I don't need this. I don't need that. I'm perfectly fine. I'm perfectly content. And then you're starting to take your stand back into your real self. And what you begin to find that is that now that you're kind of relaxed, now that you said, okay, God, you do. You know, God's running the whole universe, so you say He can handle my life too. As you start to develop a little of this sense of surrender, you see that not only is your inner life getting better, but suddenly your outer life begins to unfold. Because now God is able to begin to manifest through you and bring experiences you never would have thought of or never even hoped for, but you realize, oh, things are going well. You know, I don't have to worry and fret and concern myself about things. Matter of fact, people who have reached a kind of a high realized state, they say, and sometimes they are totally separate from the body, and they're totally separate from the activities of the world. But yet the body, even though they're totally uninvolved with it, they're totally something different than that body, they find that the body continues to function. It walks, it talks, it does, responds to things, does whatever it does, because it's really, that body is an expression of divine consciousness. We grab hold of it with our consciousness, we grab hold of it, and they say, this is my body, and I'm the one that's running it, and I'm the one in charge here, and then all of our kind of struggles and disappointments and frustrations and everything come. When we begin to step back, we find out, oh, I don't have to plot and plan and try to get this thing or that thing. I just begin to rely on the grace of God. And that grace, as Sri Ramakrishna said, it's always present. But you, as he said, the breeze of God's grace is always blowing, but you have to unfurl your sails. That grace, we're actually meant to live by grace, to live everything as a gift of Divine Mother. But we tend to block that out. And it's only when you start to actually reconnect with the divine presence, underlying things, that then that grace can truly begin to function. It's like, I think last week I used the example of a washing machine. You have a washing machine and you pray over it for centuries and nothing happens. But as soon as you plug it in, then it begins to flow. It begins to work. And prayer is like that. Normally we think, oh, prayer means I go to God and I talk to him and I say, I've got this problem here, I've got an exam coming up, or I do this. You know, and like Swami Varadananda used to say, that at exam time, all the students, they would go to the Shiva temple and ring the bell. and say, oh God, you help me get through this test. And then God would say, well, did you study? So as you sow, so you reap. In other words, the things of the world, if you want things of the world, you take the actions necessary to achieve success in the world. The real prayer is just when you want to be with God. Because this starts that connection where things begin to flow. And then you see the transformation that begins to take place. See, what the Vedanta teaches is that there's one consciousness, there's one life. That life is expressing itself through each and every individual. Now, as a human being, we've cut ourselves off. We've shut out that one life, that source of our being, and then with our intelligence, our health, our various abilities, we're trying to conquer the world, trying to get things in the world. But when we reconnect with the source, it's like the tree. Suppose you have a tree that's full of blossoms, full of fruit, full of beautiful flowers. And now suppose you cut a branch off that tree. And that branch, that eagle, will say, oh, I'm such a wonderful branch. I got such beautiful flowers, I got such beautiful fruit. But then, after some days, it starts to wither and dry up and die, and all the fruit starts to go bad and things, because it's not connected to the tree anymore. It's not connected to the source of its life. And this is what happens. As human beings, we cut ourselves off from that underlying prana, that underlying energy, that underlying divine life force. We cut ourselves off from that. We try to live life as a human being, as a body, soul, and we find gradually we're getting older. We're getting worn out. We're slowly, our powers, which were very strong and which we took great pride in at one time, those powers gradually start to weaken and diminish because we've cut ourselves off. But once you're connected, once you've reconnected yourself through that tree of life, then everything flows. Just as the sap flows into the branch, just by its very nature, in the same way, God's grace begins to flow through our life and kind of keep us functioning. So this is the idea, and it's important when they talk about self, they talk about realizing Brahman and things like that. At the same time, it's important to remember that we have to remind ourselves that all the time that our real self is ever free without any entanglements. It is supreme and not subservient to anything, and it is the self in all. It is in everything, in everybody, in all. It is all. So as long as we're claiming this particular person is me and saying God, then we're cut off. When you move back towards the Spirit, back towards the divine presence, gradually you're also moving back into the oneness, the unity of things. And then, as you connect with that, then you realize, oh, you're totally secure, totally happy, totally taken care of. Everything is just fine. And we don't fully realize that as long as we're clinging to our own, this is called selfishness. That I'm the most important person. I need to get what I want to get, and then we use other people's objects to fulfill our desires. But when you kind of let go of all that and begin to go back to the source, then comes unselfishness. And Swami Vivekananda said that selfishness is contraction. It brings your consciousness down smaller and smaller and smaller. So all you can think about is what's happening to this particular body. And as he said, contraction is death. You're gradually dwindling down from a wonderful divine being to a very, very small being. Whereas he said, unselfishness is expansion, and expansion is life. It's gradually growing back into the universal, the true nature of your consciousness. So we just got a couple more verses to go, and then we'll be done with this chapter, with this book. So come to verse 16. So there are 101 veins connected with the human heart. One of them passes through the crown of the head. When the self of an individual goes out along this vein, the individual attains immortality. If, however, he goes out through other veins, he is reborn, and his rebirth may be in a human or a subhuman form. So a person who has realized his identity with Brahman is no longer subject to birth and death. He is now free. But how does this death take place? There is one special vein attached to the heart which passes through the crown of the head. At the time of death, the self travels along this vein, which is known as the Sushumna. Only those who are highly advanced spiritually can die in this manner. They are people who have no attraction for things on earth or in heaven. They have totally uprooted their desires. Other people, however, die only to be reborn, as they have many desires in their minds and that are still unfulfilled. They may be reborn as humans or as animals or plants. When they die, they leave their bodies through other veins. So this is kind of from a yogic perspective, that there are various ways by which the soul of the conscious can leave the body, and depending on that, it goes to different realms, different experiences. But basically, if a person has strong desires, he may not be able to fulfill them in this particular life, because he was born into a particular body, particular family, particular amount of education, and so forth. So it's his life is kind of narrow. I mean, it's in a groove that kind of follows along. Now, once the soul leaves the body, then it's now free to become and to do whatever it wants to do. It's not bound, it's not limited into this particular lifespan and this particular life kind of pageant. It's now, can totally choose, whatever it wants, and so it's drawn according to its desires, according to what it wants and needs. Then it'll be drawn into another experience. For example, a person in this life may be very poor, very, very young, in poverty all the time, and he's always thinking, oh, if only I could be rich. It's not going to happen in this life. That's not his karma, his prarabdha. It just won't happen. But once he's free of the body, he says, well, now I can go and I can be born into a rich family. And like that, the soul goes from experience to experience, from life to life to life, always trying to satisfy some desires. And basically, he goes, it has a desire, he goes, experiences that desire, and then says, okay, I'm done with that now. In other words, they say, first yoga, then yoga. So for some souls, in the earlier stage, they have to have experiences in order to get tired of those experiences. It's like a person's outside, hungry, cold, so he's looking in a restaurant, a 5-star restaurant. Everybody's eating wonderful meals. And he keeps thinking, oh, if only I could be there, if only I could have one of those wonderful meals, I would be so happy. But he doesn't have it. Now, next life, he's born and he becomes a billionaire. But now, every night he's getting a 5-star, he's got his own chef, every night he gets a 5-star gourmet meal. After a while, it's just a meal. It's just, you barely notice it anymore. It's just, a routine. And so then he said, okay, I'm not interested anymore. I've experienced that, I've had that, and now I'm looking for something else. And so like this, souls, they go through all these different experiences in lives, And eventually they reach a point where they begin to say, all these lives, all these different experiences, what good is it all? Well, there must be something higher than this. And then it begins the kind of return journey. Like thinking, well, what is there higher than this human existence? And then it begins kind of going back. So at certain stages, some souls, they're like children, they have to go and play, and this world is like a big amusement park. They can do all kinds of, for a soul, this world is like a big amusement park. Soul doesn't realize, once it gets into the world, it gets knocked around and pushed, and all kinds of things happen to it. And then it goes back and says, oh, it's like, soul looks at it, it's like, well, let me go. And then it gets in, it's like being in a football game. And then it goes back, sits on the bench for a while, and says, oh no, let me back in the game. And then it runs back into the world again. And so like that, at a certain stage, souls go through their experiences, but then eventually, after you've gone through all these things, you begin to know there must be something higher than this. And then this inner search, this search for true spirituality, to the search for God, then it really begins, and then gradually the soul moves back towards God, and that process of moving back towards God has been described as going from glory to glory to glory. God is infinite. God is infinite wisdom, infinite love, infinite power, the only power, and all that's within you. And so as you begin to move back towards it, all things start to be revealed. The veils gradually get removed. You reach higher states of consciousness, and slowly, then until you find you actually attain the union with God, where the ultimate kind of in Advaita Vedanta, but is where the individual merges completely with the divine. And for a great majority of people, that's a very frightening idea. It seems like I'm going to die. If I'm not there, what good is it? If I'm not there to enjoy things, what's the value of it? And so very few people are actually interested in that. A lot of people, but they're interested in heaven. They're interested in going to a place that's a lot more fun than this place, a lot nicer, and so forth. But the idea of merging in God or Brahman isn't interested at all. But once a person's gone on this path, once a person's developed a certain point and begun to experience the nature of Brahman, then gradually there's a tremendous yearning to get closer and closer to that reality. And so the kind of merging about it just kind of happens. And it comes in a moment of self-forgetfulness. We get a little tiny glimpse of that anytime we're intensely concentrated on something, intensely involved in something. For example, a person is playing tennis. And during that, usually when he's finished with the game of tennis, if it's really kind of intensely into it, he'll feel kind of a refreshment. Like for a while, all his problems, all his worries, all this things going on in the mind, they've all kind of dropped away for a time being, and he was just totally absorbed in playing tennis. So that sense of relief, of refreshment, of being without worries, without cares, that simple kind of joy that can come from intense concentration, that gives you just a little tiny glimpse. And this is when you study yoga, study meditation, this is the idea is that our human state of consciousness, our human state of existence, which creates all the limitations, and our human mind, which creates all of our sense of problems and worries and cares. This is all, it's like, I think I mentioned here, it's like a cocoon that we enclose ourselves in. And this, with all our desires, with all our involvement, and this thing and that, we create a cocoon around ourselves that keeps us thinking this world, this life is the only existence there is. And so we don't we're not aware of anything beyond this very limited type of life we're in now. But when a person achieves very intense concentration, and this is the kind of what behind the practice of Raja Yoga, of the sense meditation, then for the time being that cocoon, or that where we created, that network of thought that we created, it temporarily dissolves. And then the real self, the real being that we are, the real consciousness that we are, for a moment it kind of comes through. But as long as we're focused on ourselves, on our minds, on our worries, on our desires, as long as we're focused on being our personal self, then we're in that cocoon. But at some point there comes a breaking out of the cocoon. And then like the butterfly, now you're free and you can fly. Before you were just a little worm, in a very small space. Now you suddenly find yourself free, able to fly. So as long as a person has desires, like it's said in this verse, it will tend, after death, to go through experiences that will eventually draw it into a life where it can fulfill those desires. And this process keeps going on and on and on until it realizes what I need is not desires, it's not acquiring things or different enjoyments and so on. What I need is to find God, to find the divine presence within, and then it begins the return journey. So we just got then in verse 17, next to the last verse, it says, there lies in everyone's heart the inmost self, which is the size of a thumb. Just as a tender munchuk stalk is taken out of its sheath with great care, so also a person seeking liberation should, with the help of his discrimination, learn to separate the self from the body, and also learn to regard the self, thus separated, as the pure and immortal cosmic self. So this verse says that there is one common self everywhere and in every being. And this self fills everything. It is called Purusha, that which fills. So this self lies hidden in the heart of every being. It is hidden by the body, the organs, and their collective activities. Here it is compared to the tender stalk within the muncha grass, which is hidden by its sheath. In order to take the stalk out of the grass, you have to separate it from the sheath with great care. Similarly, you have to separate the self from the body and the organs. The body and the organs are all superimpositions of the self. They are dependent on the self, for without the self, they are dead. The self animates them, and so they work. In fact, the self is the sole authority under whose command everything in the world moves and acts. The self is the inmost being of everything. That is why it is not seen. As you remove the sheath of the muncha grass to get to the stalk, so also you reject the apparent self, saying neti neti. It is not this, not this. You have to exercise your power of discrimination to the utmost to get to the real, the self. Only then do you discover the self and realize that this self, pure and immortal, is the common self of all. It is also your own self. In other words, you are one with all. And when you realize this, you are free. See, as human beings, as individuals, as egos, we're separating ourselves. We're cutting ourselves out from that oneness, from that one self, and saying, I'm this person right here. And then we interact with other people, and sometimes we love them, sometimes we hate them, and sometimes we fight, and sometimes we cooperate, like that. We're interacting. But each and every individual is an expression only of the one consciousness. Now, in the state of ajnana or ignorance, you don't know that. And you see things in terms of duality, of me and the other person. As you move towards the truth of things, you're moving also into the unity of things, the oneness of things. well, gradually this sense of distinction that I'm the important one goes away, fades away, and instead you're getting just the one presence. And then it doesn't matter what happens to this particular body, this particular person is not very important anymore. What matters is your sense of being a part of the oneness of things, about the unity of things. Then everything gets back into perspective. And this is, God is there, and God is there as the reality in each person. But we shut that out. We say, no, I'm not busy here. I can handle things better. And so, like that, and then we find ourselves with all kinds of problems and struggles and conflicts and things that come up. But as soon as you start to get back in moving in the spiritual direction towards God, you're also moving into kind of the oneness of things. And you find then that what's functioning as you is no longer your personal emotions and desires and preferences and I want this to happen. Now you're just kind of relaxed and steady. And now what's expressing itself to you is ultimately the divine will, because this is what we are and what we're meant to be, is instruments of the one divine consciousness. But as long it's like that power, God has been described as the impersonal splendor. And Robert Browning, in his poem, says that there is an innermost center in ourselves where the truth abides in fullness. And to know rather consists in opening out a way whence the imprisoned splendor may escape, than effecting entry from a light supposed to be without. So each and every person, good or bad, has at the center of its being the divine presence. And the real function, the real goal of life, purpose of life, is to open out a way where that divine presence can begin to operate through you. And then the individual, the human being, it becomes just the instrument in its hands. So, and this is what we're trying to do. So at a certain stage, when a person becomes religious, they tend to become do-gooders. They say, yes, I want to do good to the world, I want to help people, and so forth. But when you go deeper, you realize that the best thing you can possibly do for the world is to get out of the way and let God function. To be His instrument, let Him function, and then you see everything begins to get back into this proper place, what it's meant to be. We think the more we go outside, the more we try to get things accomplished outside, we think the more we're going to get accomplished. But in truth, when we can go within and begin to make that connection with that inner splendor, that inner presence, then you truly begin to function. Because there's no limit to what God can do. God is omniscient, He's omnipotent, He's all-loving. So if you let Him kind of be in charge, then there's literally no limit to what can be accomplished. Through our meditation, when we sit for meditation in the morning, to some extent we're beginning to make that connection. And we find that as it develops, that connection brings a kind of a power and a blessing into our life that then flows out to everyone we come in contact with. But you have to make the connection. You have to spend some time stepping out of the world, stepping out of all your activities and busyness and things, and spend some time being just with God. And you don't, at that time, you don't try to solve any of your problems. You don't go to God, how can I go bless this person, or go do this, or go fix this? You just go to be with God. And then you'll find that gradually that transformation begins to come. Something that blesses you, and automatically it begins to bless everybody else. If you have the light shines. It shines on everybody you come. You don't have to project it and say, oh, bless this person, bless that person, because then the ego is getting in the way and trying to take charge of the process again. But just get the light, get the presence of God within yourself, and automatically everybody else will be uplifted. They'll get some of the light too, just naturally. So this is behind all of this, the teachings and the renunciation and everything else, is ultimately the idea that there's one self, there's one consciousness, and only as we let go of our little self and begin to allow that higher self within, do we begin to live in that consciousness. And when we live in that consciousness, that's also what begins to express itself and manifest through us. So this presence, this self with a capital S, is there within as the innermost self of each and every person, but is also the innermost self of everything, of each and every being. And so this is what gradually we're trying to achieve. You have to exercise your power of discrimination to the utmost to get to the real, the self. Only then do you discover that the self, and realize that this self, pure and immortal, is the common self of all. It is also your own self. In other words, you are one with all. When you realize this, you are free. When you separate yourself from the all and you try to be an individual, then you may have some happy times, some good experience, but you're not free. You're always caught up in things. You're always being affected by what's coming from outside. But when you realize that nothing going on in the world is necessary to you because you have everything, and ultimately because you are everything, then you're free. And then you see the world is what it is, which is just like a show being put on by God, right? Like a movie, or that just goes on like a dream. But it's in a dream. That dream is real while you're asleep and dreaming. But when you wake up, you're in a whole different state of consciousness. And so this is the idea behind realization. Is that right now we're in the dream that we're human beings, we're living in this world, experiencing this life. But at any point, it's possible to wake up, like the Buddha. Buddha means the awakened one, enlightened one. So any moment, you can theoretically, at least you can wake up. Yeah, no, I'm with God. God's here. God's the reality. Spirit's the reality. And then you see this world. You'll be aware of it, conscious of it, but you know it's not the reality of things. That the way things appear to be, that's just like the movie going on. But the movie is not real. It only truly becomes entertaining when you know that. When you take it as real, then you're bombarded by it all the time. But when you begin to realize, oh, okay, it's just kind of show going on, then you're kind of can actually begin to appreciate it and see the beauty in it. So finally, we come now. This is the very last verse of the book, verse 18. Nachiketa thus received from death the knowledge of Brahman. In other words, that Brahman is his own self and the self of all, as well as the knowledge of yoga, including its rules and practices. This helped him to attain union with Brahman and become pure and immortal. Anyone else who attains such knowledge becomes the same, in other words, pure and immortal. So the Upanishad gives here a eulogy of the knowledge of Brahman, which is also the knowledge of the self, and also states the benefits of such knowledge. You become free, pure, and immortal. You realize that your self is the cosmic self, and that you are one with everything, from Brahman down to the tiniest blade of grass. You realize the oneness of things. As there is none else but you are free from fear, free from attachment, free from desires. You are then really free. You are pure. You are also immortal. So Nachiketa attained this state, and anyone who follows in his footsteps can also attain it. So here ends the third chapter of the second part of the Kathopanishad. And then Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahana Bhunatu Saha Virayam Karavahe Tejasvina Fatitamastu Ma Vidvisavahe. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Okay, any questions? Okay, so we finished now the Kathopanishad, and this is the first of the Upanishads. And now we'll take a break until the new year. We'll take a couple of weeks off, and then probably we'll start with the Isha Upanishad next. And say first Friday in January we'll start. Isha, Ishavasya Upanishad, yeah. And let me see, tomorrow, Saturday we have Ramnam here tomorrow, and other than the regular classes and things, we're good now. Sarda Devi Puja. We originally sent out an announcement that it was going to be on the 24th, on Christmas Eve, but we said it's going to be on the 22nd. That's the Sunday before. It'll be at 10:30 in the morning. It'll start with bhajans, and the puja will start at 11. So Sarda Devi Puja will be on the Sunday, the 22nd at 10:30. Then on Christmas Eve, we have our Christmas Eve Puja. And that will be in the evening. It'll start with music at 6:30, and the puja will start at 7 on the 24th, which I think is a Tuesday. So all that's coming up. And then I think we're going to then have a Kalpatara Day. January 1st, we're going to have a program, I think in the afternoon, from like 2:30 to 3:30 or something like that. But they're going to be putting an announcement.
Is it going to be here or?
It'll be here. I think we're going to do something at the bhajas in the morning, but then in the afternoon, I think they're going to do something here. Om Asatoma Sagyamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Vedyoramam Amitam Gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. O Lord, lead us from the unreal to the real, lead us from darkness to light, and lead us from death to immortality. Om peace.